Okay, yes, two presenters, and you're probably wondering why two presenters, and I think that's pretty obvious. It's because we are both terrified. We're both terrified of standing in front of large crowds and talking about our work.
No, we're just kidding. We do this all the time.
We do this all the time. You're gonna find out how awesome we are at this in a second. Okay. All jokes aside, the reason why we're both up here is because as a content strategist, I can't really talk about content without UX.
And as a UX strategist, I can't really do any of my work without, as a UX strategist, I can't do any of my work without content.
That's right. And when one leads without the other, you wind up with situations like this. Confusing, odd, ugly. And when things are confusing like that, I think they can become dangerous. So that's why, as the copywriter and content strategist for this presentation, I have come up with an engaging, potentially viral headline and title for this presentation. It is, How Content Can Kill You.
Whoa.
This is your photo opportunity right now.
DL, I think we need to take
Please use the hashtag content kills.
Hold on. Before you keep going, DL. I think we just need to take a step back here.
Okay,
right?
UX. UX.
I really don't think that this is what we're really trying to say.
You might be right.
I think in some instances, content can be misleading.
I don't know. I could think of two ways that pencil could kill you.
I don't think the writer was really trying to kill you. It was just really, this is an example of content being written without regards to the actual experience and context that it's being in use. Content can also be very overwhelming.
Think of an overwhelming situation, potentially trying to exit a plane in an emergency. And I think that this message could contribute to death.
This one's a little harder to argue, I gotta agree. But I still don't think the writer's trying to kill you at this point. I think it's just a consequence of really not looking at the different scenarios and use cases and context to the written content again. So content can also be very unclear.
I was at a popular restaurant, kind of nightclub place that has frictionless payment. Thought that my bill was paid, was suddenly met with security outside. I felt like I was going to die.
I think the unclear content can cause users to really just take the wrong action. Not so much death, but just take the wrong action. You know, words can be very easily misinterpreted, and saying what you mean isn't really as easy as it sounds. Content can be very disingenuous.
This is depressing. Now, who's gonna wanna exercise? Get out there and do it, you know, and you haven't done anything in 7 days. And you know, we all know what happens when you don't exercise. I don't think I need to say it.
Again, I don't think the writer was trying to kill you at this point. I think, again, this is just a consequence of someone not taking enough time to look at the overall experience and disregarding really small moments like this where you can actually serve up some useful content. So all in all, I don't think that content is trying to kill us. I think these are all just really symptoms of content being an afterthought.
Okay, UX, let me work with you here a little bit. Let me just adjust that title. Maybe it's not how content can kill you, but maybe it's more about how content can kill experiences.
That sounds a little better.
Yeah, okay, we got that. We're working through this together. Maybe you guys can help us out a little bit too later on.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a big problem, content, and more at Engine we're learning the projects that we're working on. The big question mark with everyone is content. And when you don't really have an understanding of things when you start out, they can become dangerous.
Yeah, and at Engine, we've identified kind of two areas where we found that content can be the most dangerous and can kind of kill the experiences. So one is during the prototyping phase, and one is during the client handoff. So we'll go into more detail about these two different areas. So first, I want to talk about prototyping. So as we all know in the industry, having content ready at the very beginning of projects isn't exactly something that's very feasible. But again, the solution to that shouldn't be to design with lorem ipsum and dummy content and shapes, you know? That just shows that we're paying a lot more attention to the design elements and the containers. And to be honest, people didn't come to the site to admire your great designs. They came there for information and they came there for content.
They came to admire my great writing.
Yeah.
But just try to always use real content whenever possible. So either make it up yourself, If you don't feel comfortable doing that, go grab some off the internet. Try to make it the experience as real as possible, because it's going to help you have conversations that you might not be thinking about.
So I don't know if any of you are familiar with Sketch, but this is a plugin called a content generator plugin that basically randomly generates content wherever you have empty boxes. And content generators like this make it really easy for us to put in placeholder content that's not really contextual to the problem that we're trying to solve. You know, using things like this really squanders the opportunity for us to actually take the time, take a look at what we're creating, and actually communicate what should be placed there in order to help the user better understand the product or service that you're trying to sell.
Right. I have no doubt that we're all going to be out of a job eventually by algorithms that can just, create great, engaging websites, but we're not quite there yet. So if you want to communicate the importance of content to your client, make sure that you're treating it as an important thing too, and not leaving it to algorithms or scripts on your desktop.
So we need to remember that letters and words are actually visual elements, and we need to design with them in mind. There are possibly two things that can happen when designing with fake content. One is an example similar to this, when content doesn't exactly fit the overall design once it's been handed off to you from a client. The second thing that can happen is that DL will come back with great written content that's just amazing, but you don't have the container that actually is able to house that. And what happens is you cut the content and dilute the brand voice as well as the key messages that you're actually trying to get out there.
Right. So lorem ipsum is just a really kind of nice, organized way of saying, hey, let's just worry about this later. When you do that, you're going to wind up with a situation like this because you haven't had the kind of conversations with your client about how much content do you have? How long is it? How often do you make content? These are all really important conversations that you should be having before you get into the wireframing stages. Otherwise, you're going to wind up with a hot mess like that.
So this is a quote we took from an article: "Bad writing undermines great design, and bad design overshadows great writing." So the two things need to always be in balance, and you need to make sure that you're always working in tandem with one another in order to deliver kind of that holistic experience that you set out to ship. So the next thing we want to talk about is client handoff. So in this scenario, let's say you've worked collaboratively, you're able to create a prototype and work with content, and it's something that gets signed off after you build it. But our work doesn't really end there.
Yeah, it's still just a prototype.
Yeah. It's not always feasible, again, to have content delivered to you at the beginning of the project, and ideally when passing off the concepts, what we imagine is that we would have this full team behind the creation of this content. We'd have a subject matter expert, we'd have marketing, copywriters, and editors ready to kind of champion our concept and write against it. But the reality is that we sometimes just have this guy here. And a lot of the times they don't have experience in copywriting. Yeah. So we need to ensure that when we're passing off our work that it's something that can be replicated and can actually be in context with the experience that we
Right.
created.
So more and more we're finding that organizations are dealing with the demands of content production just as much as we all are. It's a big issue in the things that we create and hearing about the things that they're dealing with. Essentially, we're asking, in a lot of situations, organizations to become newsrooms, to become an editorial team. And often they're just maybe a product person that's close to the product. Maybe they're a salesperson that sells that product. So they know the product, but they don't necessarily have the expertise to be able to create content on a regular basis. Those are the skills of an editor, a copywriter, of a news team, etc. So this is what we're hearing all the time. And so just keep in mind that at the beginning, the things that you're making, make sure that you've got your client in mind and helping them raise the bar to the level that you're bringing them up to. That's a big one.
Yeah, and
otherwise you'll get burned.
We're still in a position where we really have to fight for the importance of content in the overall project and actually having to sell it through to clients. And content is something that's really timely, it's expensive, and it takes a lot of effort to create. So how do we ensure that content doesn't kill our experiences? So we want to talk a little bit about what we do at Engine in order to kind of not have our experiences killed. So there's two things. One happens at the very beginning of the project where we educate the client, and one that happens during client handoff, which is guiding the client. So how do we educate the clients on the importance of content production? So one of the ways we've done this is through our sprint process, which you've heard a little bit about the sprint process earlier, but we've actually put Google Ventures 5-day sprint into practice at our agency. So what this has done is actually allow us to design, prototype, and test the concept all within 5 days. So for our agency, it's been really beneficial for us to use in that we're able to actually validate a lot of our assumptions at a really rapid pace. So we're also able to get feedback on content at an early stage.
Yeah, and it brings those subject matter experts into the conversation early. So that when they're prototyping with us, they can sort of get some early insights on the kind of demands that we're going to be placing on them in terms of content production. So they're going to be able to, start to plan for the future, put the resources in place to be able to create the content that we're asking them to create. They can get an idea of what it is that we're making in the first place and how to sustain it. I love this picture because I'm obviously staring death in the face right there. That's what happens sometimes during the content sprint.
So this is what happens when we concept. For Google Venture Sprint process, it asks you to be able to actually concept out an idea using 3 panels. So that already is kind of a hard thing to do, to have this great idea for this big project within these 3 panels. But what we often see happening is that we actually rely on content to actually sell through that idea. It's very rare that just wireframes or just seeing where things exist actually could sell a full idea to someone. The content is really important. So just as you need that kind of visual framework, you also kind of need that framework around the language as well.
Yeah, one of the things I love so much about the concept sprint is it's given new life to copywriters. I don't know if there's any copywriters in the crowd right now, but I don't know if you're working in the concept sprint, but language is so important to help sell through the ideas during that process, and it's given me some new work.
Yeah. And this gave us the ability to actually have conversations around the production of the content and the workload, because sometimes we sell through ideas and clients don't really understand the kind of production load that they're undertaking when we do sell.
Especially if they weren't actually participating in the concept sprint. But as the conversation evolves, we come out of those sort of back of the napkin sketch sort of process, and things become more high fidelity, but conversations are still happening, and we're always able to put something real in front of somebody. So developers have something to talk about. The designer has something to talk about. And obviously content and UX have things to talk about. So as it evolves, it all starts to come together and everybody's moving along. Now the problem is that eventually you're gonna have to hand off this concept. And that's where little fires can start.
And it's really easy for us to sell ideas and concepts, but it's also our job to ensure that whoever we're giving that concept or idea to could actually execute and maintain the integrity of the work, especially when we're working so hard to create it.
Yeah. So I wanted to do a little bit of an exercise, and this was the interactive part of the presentation. I know everybody loves those parts, isn't it, right? Yeah. So I wanted to just take a moment and have 3 random people read this sentence. So I'm just gonna come into the crowd and hand you the mic. This is your moment to experience what it's like.
Put the happy back into your insurance.
Put the happy back into your insurance.
And you.
Put the happy back into your insurance.
Okay, fantastic. I think my experience would be dead. Just kidding. No, actually, that was actually really cool. It worked out a lot better than I thought, because really what we heard there were 3 really unique voices. And content has to be unique for it to be interesting. Now, what we don't want in content is inconsistency. If I hired you 3 as my copywriters and just told you to go ahead and start putting the joy into insurance, we would probably wind up with 3 very different copy lines. This is a problem. No, 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 no. This will kill my experience that I'm making for my client. And also when I hand it off to my client and they have to pick up the ball and produce the huge amount of content for the experience that we've concepted in the sprint, we can wind up with a lot of inconsistent problems. So, how do we fix that? We create documentation to educate people how to create content for the things that we're making. Now, I don't know how many of you here have used a personal trainer, but what makes a personal trainer great is their character, how they motivate you, how they speak to you in those moments where you're like, oh my God, I can't do this anymore. So for Adidas, we wanted to create that kind of experience, that kind of engagement that a user could have with a training app, because essentially that's what it is. So we created a guide so that anybody creating content for Adidas Train and Run could learn how to enact that character, that experience in very key moments. The pre-run, the run, and then that moment of reflection afterwards. It gives them copy examples, lots of things to help them out. So, you know, a year from now, 3 writers from now, they're able to replicate that, all that great work that went into the concepting phase.
And the important thing to note here is that when we're writing content, we never want to have it kind of separated from the experience. So what we did here was been able to kind of see those key moments in the experiences and how we have to kind of change and speak to those different different stages in the journey.
Yeah, and what I love about it so much is this is the beauty of UX and content working together. So UX outlining those pivotal moments, and then content strategy, copywriting, really helping to bring those to life. So in ending, we just wanted to end off with a few things that you can keep in mind walking away about content and UX.
So keep it in tandem, meaning that work with a content strategist, work with designers, work very collaboratively up front with the client.
Even in the presentations you give.
Yeah. That way you guys are working towards a collective goal, and you guys can all work to actually create that experience for what you're building.
Yeah, I think you'll recognize this one, keep it real. We've said that a lot. So make sure you're trying to make things as real for the people that are buying into what you're selling as possible. Keep it real. And lastly, keep it focused. Keep it focused on the end user. We all know that. We all hear that a lot. But also the people that have to use it, the people that are buying the product or the experience that you're creating. Make sure that you're creating documentation for them that they can understand how to use it, because they are a user just as much as your end user is. I don't remember the last time anybody bought a piece of technology that didn't come with a manual or some kind of guide teaching you how to use it. So we have several different guides. The tone of voice thing is kind of a different one that we use, but we have a lot of different documents that we use to educate our clients and keep our concepts from being killed, or from content killing you.
Or killing your experiences.
Yeah, it's probably the better title.
Thank you.